John chapter 5, John chapter 9, Acts chapter 4. John 5, verse 15. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. John chapter 9, verse 11. Well, verse 10, how were thine eyes opened? He answered and said, a man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, go to the pool Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then Acts chapter 4, we preached upon these verses last week, verses 7 through verse 10. And when they had set them in the midst, they asked, by what power or by what name have ye done this? Then Peter, filled with the Holy Ghost, said unto them, ye rulers of the people and elders of Israel, if we this day be examined of the good deed done to the impotent man, by what means he is made whole, be it known unto you all, and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom ye crucified, whom God raised from the dead, even by him does this man stand before you whole. Three separate healing miracles that have a common theme. It was Jesus. In John 5, we read of a man who had been lame for 38 years, and he's healed. And we hear him declare, it was Jesus. In John 9, we read of a man born blind. His sight is restored. And in response to the question, how were thine eyes opened? We hear him declare, a man that is called Jesus. In Acts chapter 4, we read of a lame man from birth who was over 40 years old, and he's healed. And standing before the council, Peter, in response to the question, by what power or by what name have ye done this, declares, be it known unto you all, and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, even by him doth this man stand here before you whole. So three separate occasions in the context of the miraculous, it is boldly declared, it was Jesus. It was Jesus. Three separate occasions in the context of the miraculous, Jesus is given the credit and the glory. Three separate occasions, again in the context of the miraculous, Jesus 3 times is acknowledged as the reason. So in each of these, we read of a miraculous wonder. And we are specifically told it is because of Jesus. So I want to speak this morning on miraculous wonders because of Jesus. First of all, we want to consider the nature and characteristics of Christ's healing miracles. In Acts chapter 2, Peter is preaching on the day of Pentecost, and in verse 22 he calls their attention. He says, ye men of Israel, hear these words. And the next words out of his mouth are, Jesus of Nazareth. And then he goes on to say that he was manifested, and he demonstrated that he had been sent of God. The means of doing so were by miracles, wonders, and signs. Miracles, wonders, and signs. Each of those words accentuate the power of Christ's works. The word miracles is interventions of God's power, an occurrence above nature, beyond nature, and beyond the ability of man. That's a miracle. The word wonders is used to accentuate the remarkableness, the marvel, the awe of these miracles or of Christ's works. And the word signs is used to accentuate the truth that was conveyed in the works, showing that they were not merely events without cause. They each had a cause. They each were acts of God's purpose and wisdom. Reading on in verse 22, we see Acts 2, verse 22, which, referring back to miracles, wonders, and signs, God did by Him, by Jesus of Nazareth. And we see that what He did by Him was visible, it was known, and was undeniable in the midst of you, as ye yourselves also know. So the miracles of Christ, the miraculous works of Christ, can be divided into four basic categories. There are miracles over nature. There are healing miracles. And there's more of them than the others. There are miracles over demonic forces. And there are miracles of resurrection. And no matter what category, they are all significant and very real events. They are of great variety. Every one of them occurred in everyday life. Every one of them met specific and very definite needs. Every one of them is an act of God's grace, His love, and His mercy. They all reveal to us the absolute sovereignty of God, the dominion of God, the control, the preeminence of Christ, and the providing and transforming and enabling power of Christ and the sufficiency of Christ. Each of the gospel writers give eyewitness account of some of the miracles, not all, but of some of the miracles that Christ worked during His earthly ministry. And they directly attribute them to Jesus Christ. And as we've said many times, all through the Gospels we see Jesus showing up in great places of need and doing what only He can do. Showing up in places of darkness and disease, places of distress and sorrow and anguish, places of desperation, places of helplessness, places of hopelessness, even places of death, and doing the miraculous, revealing that He is all-encompassing. He is the one who can. So all through the Gospels, there is Jesus in dire places, in these places of seeming impossibility, places of wretchedness. And we see Him coming into the needy and desperate lives of men and women and children of a variety of backgrounds. And He shows to them His pity and His care and His tenderness and His kindness. And there He is. He's in places of sickness, places of disease, and He heals what no one else could do. He's in places of desperation, places of helplessness and hopelessness, and He brings hope. He's in places of weakness, and He brings strength. Again, places of distress and sorrow, and He brings comfort. Places of anguish, and He brings relief. Places of sorrow and heartache, and He brings joy. All through the Gospels, we see this pattern. We see Him in places of fear, bringing courage. Places of defeat, bringing victory. All through the Gospels, there's Jesus. And He's bringing about deliverance. He's bringing about transformation. He's bringing satisfaction in the lives. He's bringing peace and assurance and optimism and joy unspeakable into lives. Places of urgent need. Places of desperate need. And He's there as the one who can. The one who can make a difference that only He can make. And we see it all through the Gospels. Again, in our text verses, we hear the once lame man in John chapter 5 with much assurance, with much conviction declare, it was Jesus. It was Jesus that made me whole. We hear the blind man declare with much assurance and conviction, a man that is called Jesus anointed mine eyes, and I received sight. And then we hear and see Peter point to the once crippled man and declare with much assurance and conviction, it's by Him. It's by Him. This one you crucified, but God raised again. It's by Him that this man doth stand before you whole. And again, this truth is laid out all through the Gospels. So we want to bring forth some individuals who experienced the miraculous healing power of Christ. And I believe they would all testify the same thing. It was Jesus. Again, there's the crippled man of John chapter 5. He formerly sat amongst the frail, the diseased, the infirm, the paralyzed, the crippled, and the blind. And they all sat in these porches in a place called Bethesda. And this man lived in the gloom of these porches. I mean, this was a gloomy place. He lived amongst the miserable. He had been an invalid, living in a state of debilitation. As you read the account, he lived in a state of disappointment for 38 years. He had been a man who had been shoved aside and neglected for many years. But there he stands, transformed. No longer living in those porches, no longer residing there. There he is. And one might ask, how did this come about? How is it that now, after 38 years, you can walk? And he would say, well, one day, I was sitting there in my misery and my hopelessness, and there came this man named Jesus. And he walked through the multitude of the sick and the diseased and the frail and the infirm and the blind and the paralyzed and the crippled. And He came right where I was. And He looked at me and He said, He asked, Wilt thou be made whole? And I began to tell Him my story. And then He told me to do 3 things that I could not do. He told me to rise. He told me to take up my bed. And He told me to walk. And then I felt a power and a strength that I had not felt in 38 years. And I was able to rise. And I was able to bend over and pick up my bed. And I was able to walk. And I've been walking ever since. Then there's the blind man of John chapter 9. We're told that he was born blind. He's never seen anything. He was a beggar. He lived in darkness. Never saw light. So there it is, darkness and begging. Just an ordinary day in his life. Darkness and begging. That was his everyday life. But there he is. And he's no longer begging. And he can see. And someone might say to him, you can see. And you're no longer begging. What happened? And he would say, one day, a man called Jesus came where I was, and He spit upon the ground. He made clay. He was obviously told these things. He couldn't see them. And He touched my eyes. And I remember feeling that touch. And He instructed me to go and wash. And I went, and still in darkness, and I washed, and I could see. And because of Him, I am blind no more. He said there in John 9:25, He said, I was blind, now I see. 2 important words, was and now. Because of Jesus, his now is no longer what it was. In verse 30, He hath opened my eyes. Yes, I went and washed, but He opened mine eyes. Then you have the lame man from birth, and there in Acts chapter 3. Unable to stand, unable to walk. Day by day carried to the gate of the temple, where he would sit and plead with those going into the temple. This was his life. And there he is. He can stand. He can walk. He can run. He can leap. He's been transformed. And someone might say, the last time I saw you, you were crippled, sitting outside the temple begging. But you look great. What in the world happened? And the man would reply, Jesus. Jesus. All 3 of these individuals know with absolute certainty it was Jesus. It was Jesus. And there are many that we can bring forth that would testify. We read of the nobleman in John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. Someone might ask him, "Didn't you have a son that was at the point of death? Whatever happened to him? How's he doing?" And the nobleman would reply, "Yes, my son was sick. In fact, he was dying. And I knew he was going to die. But I heard of a man called Jesus. And I went to him. And I pleaded with him. I begged him, 'Sir, come down ere my child die.' And he very calmly said unto me, 'Go thy way. Thy son liveth.' And I'll never forget it. As I was on my way back home, I could see my servants coming toward me. And they were very excited. And they said, 'Thy son liveth.' And I knew right then and there that it was because of Jesus. So he's doing well. You can bring forth the once paralyzed man in Mark chapter 2 that was, some might see him walking around town, and he's so happy. And they might ask him, "Weren't you once crippled? Aren't you the one that your friends would carry you on a cot?" "Yeah, that's me." "Well, what happened? Last time I saw you, you were laying on a pallet, carried about, but you look well." And the paralytic would testify, "Yes." But all that changed. All that has changed. That's in the past. One day I heard that a man called Jesus was in a house in Capernaum, and 4 friends of mine laid me on the cot, and they carried me to that house where he was. And when we got there, there was such a crowd of people that we couldn't get in. But we knew that somehow we had to get to this one called Jesus. So my friends hoisted me to the roof of that house. And they broke up the ceiling tiles. And they let me down through the roof on my cot. And when the one called Jesus saw me, he spoke words that I'll never forget. He said, "Son, thy sins be forgiven thee." And all that caused such a fuss throughout the house. But then he said unto me, "Arise, take up thy bed and walk." And as a result of his working, I rose and I walked all the way home. And I've been walking ever since. His story, all because of Jesus. I am no longer what I once was. That's the story of each one. That's our story as well. You bring forth the man with the withered hand. We read of him in Mark chapter 3. Some might see him out on the street, and there he is working with his hands. And someone might ask, didn't your hand used to be all shriveled up and crippled? And he would answer, yes, but it's all better now. It's all better now. Well, what happened? Did you take a special vitamin? What happened? Did you go to a special doctor? You tell the story. Well, one day I was sitting in a synagogue, and in came this man named Jesus. And he looked right at me. And he told me to stand. And then he said, stretch forth thine hand. And as I did, as I was stretching it forth, it was made whole. And he could say, just as Peter said of the lame man, by him. By him. It's by him that my hand has been restored. It's by him that my life is different. Think of the demonic of Gadara. We read of this man in Mark chapter 5. We're told that he had a legion of demons. These demons possessed him, controlled him. A legion of demons. The word legion was used to speak of a contingent of about 6,000 Roman soldiers. And this man had a legion of demons. One demon will ruin your life. This man had a legion of demons. And as you read Mark's account, this man was very unsettled, very restless, filled with agonizing misery. We read in verse 5 of Mark chapter 5, he was always night and day. Always night and day. He was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying. He lived in the tombs. That's not normal. And completely out of his mind. He was a masochist. Verse 5 tells us that he was always cutting himself with stones. Matthew tells us that the man was filled with rage. Matthew 8, verse 28. That he was exceeding fierce. Mark, in Mark 5, verse 3 and 4, tells us that he was uncontrollable. Man tried to control him. They tried to chain him down, but he'd break the chains. The people, again, this was their attempt to bring him under control. So they put him in fetters and chains. But he would break free. And it's declared in Mark's account, verse 4, neither could any man tame him. They tried. Nobody could fix him. Nobody could repair his life. The man also was a moral degenerate. Luke says in Luke 8:27 that he wear no clothes. But there he stands, no longer mentally disturbed, no longer mentally distressed. The agony's gone, the craziness is gone, the self-destructive behavior is gone. The uncontrollable rage is no longer there. the degeneracy and the chains, they're all gone. And if you look at him, he's peaceful. He's joyful. He's sane. He's free. And one still might approach him cautiously, those who knew him in the past. How did this come about? Society couldn't fix him. Society couldn't tame him. Man had no solution. How did it come about? And we hear Peter again, same pointing and seeing him pointing to a lame man by him. And that's how this came about. By him doth this man stand before you. Oh. You see, one day, Jesus came to Gadara. And he went to Gadara for this man, where this man lived. And Jesus rescued him from the enslavement that he was in. Rescued him from the misery and the despair and the agony, and rescued him from the powers of hell. A legion of demons. And he took this man's wasted and broken life, and he put it back together as only he could. What a story that this man had to tell. And we read that he went back home to his relatives, and he told the story. And it was a story about Jesus. He went to Decapolis, a region of 10 cities. And everyone in that area heard how Jesus healed, transformed this man. I think of the woman with a flow of blood. She is recorded there in Mark 5, verse 29. It's referred to as a plague. She had a plague, an infestation. And this was tormenting her, ravaging her body. This flow of blood rendered her ceremonially unclean, which placed her under the curse of the law, which would result in her becoming an outcast to society, an outcast to her family, an outcast to her friends, an outcast from the place of worship. This, of course, would result in great anguish, great distress, loneliness, and misery. And she was in this condition for 12 years. For 12 years, she was vexed. 12 years she was tormented, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. This woman, for 12 years, we read, had tried many things to have her life restored. We read in Mark 5, verse 26, that she had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. So now she's not only tormented with this plague, but she's poor. She's spent everything. Has nothing to show for it. In fact, she's worse off than she was. Her life is withering away. And Luke says in his account, Luke 8:43, she had spent all her living upon the physicians. Neither could be healed, of any. No one could heal her. No one had the answer. But there she stands. She's been healed. She's free from that which had plagued her. And there she stands. The hopelessness is gone. The despair is gone. The alienation is gone. The suffering is gone. She's been released from an absolutely terrible condition. And again, someone might ask, what happened? What happened? How did this come about? And we find the answer with Peter pointing to the once lame man, by him, that this man or this woman stand before you whole. You see, Jesus did what 12 years of doctors could not do. Jesus did what 12 years of expense could not do. And oh, what a story she had. What a story she could tell. And what's the story about? It's a story about him. A story about Jesus. You could bring forth the woman who was bent double. We read of her in Luke chapter 18. Here is a woman who is bent at the waist for 18 years. Bent at the waist for 18 years. Try that. Try walking around a while bent at the waist, just looking down, and imagine living your life that way. Just trying to put on clothes. And she did this for 18 years. And we're told in the account that her condition was caused by a demon. And we read that she was bowed together and could in no wise lift up herself. That tells me she tried. Perhaps she tried every day. But no matter what she tried, she could in no wise lift up herself. But look at her now. She's standing upright. Perfect posture. Someone might ask, aren't you the woman who used to be so bent over? Yes, that's me. I was bent at the waist for 18 years. And everything was so difficult. Everything was so miserable. Then she might hear, well, you look fine now. You look like an entirely different person. And she would answer, I am. I am. I am different. My whole life is different. Well, how did it happen? You think she would say, well, I don't want to really talk about it. Well, I don't think so. She would say, well, one day I was in the synagogue and a man called Jesus was teaching in that particular synagogue that I was in. And he set his eyes upon me. And he called me to himself. And then he said to me, thou art loosed from thine infirmity. And he laid his hands upon me. And oh, I'll never forget that touch. And immediately, I was made straight. And I began to praise him. And I've been doing so ever since. And I'm not going to stop. So look at her as she stands straight. And hear those words of Peter. By him doth this man, this woman, stand before you, Paul. Each of these are accounts of Jesus meeting people at their point of need. Every case, Jesus meeting people at their point of need and doing only what He can do. And in each case, these people know. They never forget it. They never get over it. It was Jesus. And here we are, forgiven, reconciled to God, redeemed, made nigh, delivered from the curse of the law, delivered from the power of darkness, accepted by God, have fellowship with God, have assurance of final victory, have a glorious future, and it's all by Him. By Him. Saved. By Him. Saved. By Him. Don't ever lose sight of that. It is by Him. No longer what I once was. Headed to a different place than I was headed before. And it's by Him. No one else gets the credit. By Him. By Him. Knowing this, how attracted we ought to be to Him. Because we have experienced what each of these healing miracles typify. Salvation. We've experienced something greater, more miraculous, more amazing, more wondrous than the healing of an ailment. We've been saved by Him. He ought to captivate me. He ought to captivate each one of us. We need to ask ourselves, we need to examine, to what degree am I drawn to Him? To what degree am I drawn to Him? It's all by Him. To what degree am I drawn to Him? Am I drawn away from Him? What influence does this one have in my life? How much of Him is in my life? He ought to be our life. He ought to be our life. And as we said last week, if it ever gets a hold of us, by Him. By Him. Life is different. Life will be different. We must always remember, it's by Him. You think of every blessing you've ever had in life, and there's as many of those as you might know, there's more you don't know. It's all by Him. It's by Him. We ought to live that life by Him. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us verse of song, we'll stand.